My husband died of a heart defect. The police investigated. The insurance company investigated. All found the same truth: natural causes. Mrs. Brennan's accusations were motivated by grief and greed. The courtroom fell silent. Every eye in Sagebrush turned to stare at the accused widow standing before them. Nathan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Anyone who questions her character is questioning mine. I stand by her completely." But this wasn't how it started. 6 weeks earlier, Claire Brennan had stepped off a train in Wyoming Territory, carrying nothing but a carpet bag and a letter from a man she'd never met, running from a scandal that threatened to destroy her. The wooden casket sat in the center of the Philadelphia train station platform, unadorned by even a single flower. Claire Brennan stood beside it, her spine straight as iron despite the weight of every eye upon her. She had buried her husband that morning. By afternoon she was boarding a westbound train, not from grief, from fear. The funeral had been small. Thomas Brennan's family stood on the far side of the cemetery, their hatred burning across the frost-covered graves like wildfire. His mother, dressed in black silk that cost more than Claire had earned in a year, pointed one gloved finger and screamed words that would echo in Claire's nightmares for months to come. "Murderer! You killed my son for his insurance money." Claire had not defended herself. What was the point? The police had investigated. The insurance company had investigated. The medical examiner had written his report in clear clinical language: congenital heart defect, death by natural causes. But facts meant nothing against the fury of a grieving mother with money and social standing. The whispers had started immediately. At the boarding house where Claire rented a room. At the factory where she worked 14-hour shifts. On the streets where she bought her bread. Poisoner. Black widow. Murderess. The words followed her like shadows, growing longer and darker with each passing day. So when Thomas's family threatened legal action, when her landlady asked her to leave, when the factory foreman told her not to return, Claire made a choice. She sold everything she owned except what fit in one carpet bag. She bought a train ticket with money she could not afford to spend. And she carried with her a letter from a man she had never met, offering her something she might not deserve. A second chance. The train whistle shrieked, pulling Claire back to the present. She gripped her bag tighter and climbed aboard each step, carrying her farther from the only life she had ever known. Through the window, she watched Philadelphia disappear into the winter haze. Somewhere in that city were the ashes of her parents, lost to a factory fire 8 years ago. Somewhere in those streets was the ghost of the girl she used to be, before loss and scandal had hardened her into something unrecognizable. The letter was folded in her coat pocket, worn soft from reading. She did not need to look at it again. She had memorized every word. Seeking wife willing to face hard winters and honest work. No promises except shelter, respect, and a man who keeps his word. It was the plainest marriage advertisement she had ever seen. No flowery language about companionship or romance, no false promises about an easy life, just the truth, stark and simple. That honesty had been what convinced her to write back. In a world full of pretty lies, brutal truth felt like solid ground. Over 6 weeks they had exchanged 3 letters. His handwriting was strong and angular, the words chosen with care. He told her about his ranch in Wyoming, about the harsh winters and the isolation, about a boy who needed a mother's influence. He did not mention love. He did not make grand declarations. He simply laid out the terms of survival and asked if she was strong enough to meet them. Claire had written back with equal honesty. She told him about the factory work, about the death of her parents, about her brief marriage to a man she had respected but never loved. She did not mention the accusations. Some truths were too heavy to put in a letter to a stranger. His final letter had included train fare and instructions. Meet him at Sagebrush Station on December 21st. He would recognize her from her description. If she changed her mind, she could keep the money and go somewhere else. No obligations. That small act of trust, offering her an escape before she even arrived, had sealed her decision more firmly than any romantic promise could have. This was a man who understood that choices made freely were the only ones worth making. The train rattled westward through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Nebraska. 3 days of watching the landscape transform from crowded cities to endless prairie. 3 days of rehearsing what she would say when she finally met Nathan Holloway face to face. 3 days of wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. On the morning of December 21st, she woke to a world turned white. Snow fell in thick curtains erasing the horizon. The conductor moved through the car calling out stations in a voice rough from coal smoke. Sagebrush Station, Wyoming territory. Claire's hands trembled as she gathered her bag. Through the frost-covered window, she could see the outline of a small depot, a general store, a church steeple rising from the white like a finger pointing toward heaven. This was not Philadelphia. This was the edge of the known world. The train lurched to a stop. Claire stood her legs unsteady after 3 days of sitting. She made her way to the door, each step feeling like walking toward either salvation or damnation. She would not know which until she saw his face. The cold hit her like a physical blow when she stepped onto the platform. Her thin coat, adequate for Philadelphia winters, was utterly useless here. The wind cut through the fabric as if it were made of paper. Snow swirled around her boots, already seeping through the worn leather. She scanned the platform looking for a man matching his description. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair, a scar on his left cheek. The platform was crowded with people meeting the train bundled in heavy coats and fur hats. Market day, she realized, the weekly event that brought ranchers and townspeople together. Then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was watching the train with an intensity that spoke of anxiety poorly concealed. This was a man who did not want to be disappointed again. Their eyes met across the platform. For a long moment, neither moved. Claire felt the weight of his assessment, saw the flicker of surprise in his expression. She was not what he had expected, perhaps younger than he had imagined, or thinner or harder. She had warned him in her letters that factory work and grief had worn away any softness she might once have possessed. He removed his hat in a gesture that was half greeting, half apology. Claire lifted her chin and walked toward him, refusing to show the fear that churned in her stomach. If this was going to work, it would have to start with honesty. No pretense, no games. "Mr. Holloway, I assume." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He nodded, his own voice low and rough when he spoke. "Miss Brennan, welcome to Wyoming." Up close, she could see the scar that ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw. An old wound, long healed, but never quite forgotten. His eyes were gray-blue, the color of winter sky, and they held a wariness that matched her own. This was a man who had been hurt before. This was a man who did not trust easily. Before either could say more, a woman's voice cut through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. "Nathan, I wasn't expecting to see you in town today." The woman approaching them was in her early 40s, dressed in a wool coat that spoke of money and taste. Her face was handsome rather than beautiful, and her eyes held a calculating sharpness that made Claire's instincts bristle. This was not a friendly inquiry. This was reconnaissance. Nathan's jaw tightened. "Business, Mrs. Bishop." "Of course." The woman's gaze swept over Claire with the thoroughness of a buyer examining livestock. "And who might this be?" There was no avoiding it. Nathan made the introduction with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Grace Bishop, this is Miss Claire Brennan, from Philadelphia." Claire extended her hand, though she knew the gesture would not be warmly received. Grace Bishop took it briefly, her gloved fingers barely making contact. Philadelphia. How unexpected. The pause before the next words was deliberate, weighted with implications. "What brings you to our humble town, Miss Brennan?" This was the moment. Claire could hedge, could offer some vague explanation about visiting or seeking employment. But lies had a way of multiplying, and she was tired of living in their shadow. "I'm here at Mr. Holloway's invitation." The effect was immediate. Grace Bishop's expression froze. Around them, conversations faltered as people turned to stare. Claire felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing pressing against her skin. but she did not look away from Grace's suddenly cold eyes. "I see." 2 words dripping with disapproval. "Well, welcome to Sagebrush, Miss Brennan." Grace turned and walked away, but not before Claire saw the fury in her eyes, quickly masked but unmistakable. This woman had her own plans for Nathan Holloway, and Claire's arrival had just disrupted them. Nathan lifted Claire's trunk with an ease that spoke of years of physical labor. He did not apologize for the scene, and Claire appreciated that. Apologies would have made it worse, would have suggested shame where there should be none. He helped her into the wagon with a hand that was rough and calloused, but surprisingly gentle. The wagon seat was hard wood, worn smooth by use. Nathan handed her a wool blanket before taking his own seat, and Claire wrapped it around her legs without comment or false protest. They rolled out of town in silence. The snow had eased to scattered flakes, and the world around them opened into a vista so vast it made Claire's breath catch. The prairie stretched in every direction, broken only by distant ridges and patches of dark timber. The sky was enormous, pressing down with a weight she had never felt in the narrow streets of Philadelphia. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said finally. "The land." Nathan's hands were steady on the reins. "Winter makes it look bigger and quieter, sometimes too quiet." There was something in his voice, a loneliness that matched her own. Claire understood then that his advertisement had not been about needing help with chores or even about providing a mother for his ward. It had been about basic human survival, about the kind of isolation that could drive a person mad if left unchecked. "I don't mind quiet," she said carefully. "Crowds can be lonelier than silence." Nathan glanced at her, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or relief at finding someone who understood. They rode in companionable quiet for a while, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves on packed snow. The road, such as it was, climbed gradually into rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. The trees stood bare and black against the white, their branches like cracks in porcelain. "How far to your place?" Claire asked. 16 miles. We'll be there before dark if the weather holds." Claire noted the qualification. If the weather holds. Out here she was beginning to understand the weather was not simply an inconvenience. It was a force that could mean the difference between life and death. "Mrs. Bishop seemed surprised to see you," she ventured. Nathan's jaw tightened again. "Grace Bishop likes to keep track of everything that happens in this county, especially where I'm concerned." "Why?" "Her brother owns the largest ranch around here, 3,000 acres. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. Nathan's voice was flat factual. "When I refused to sell, things got complicated." Claire absorbed this information, filing it away. So Nathan Holloway had enemies. Powerful ones from the sound of it. She should have expected that. Men with land and determination always had enemies. "How complicated?" she asked. "Complicated enough." Nathan did not elaborate, and Claire did not push. There would be time for details later. For now, it was enough to know that her arrival had likely made his situation worse. The landscape changed as they climbed higher. The open prairie gave way to broken country where rocky outcroppings jutted from the snow like bones from flesh. In the distance, mountains rose in purple ridges, their peaks lost in low clouds. "Your letters mentioned a boy," Claire said. "Tommy." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "He's not my blood. His father was a friend from the war. Died of fever 2 years back, asked me to take the boy." A pause. "Tommy's 8. Tommy's smart, good with animals, but he's been too long with just me and the ranch hands. He needs—" "A woman's influence," Claire finished. "You said that in your letter." "I don't mean you have to pretend to be his mother," Nathan said quickly. "I just meant he needs to learn things I can't teach him. Reading manners, how to talk to people instead of horses." Claire smiled despite herself. "I can manage that." They fell silent again, but this time the quiet felt less awkward. They were taking each other's measure, learning the boundaries of their arrangement. Claire appreciated Nathan's directness, the way he stated facts without embellishment. It reminded her of the best foreman she had worked under at the factory, a man who wasted no words but whose word, once given, was absolute. The sun was past its zenith when Nathan spoke again. "I want to be clear about something, Miss Brennan." "Claire," she interrupted. "If we're going to be living under the same roof, you should call me Claire." Nathan nodded. "Claire, then. And you can call me Nathan or Nate if you prefer. What I want to say is this." He paused, choosing words with care. "My advertisement said I was looking for a wife, but I'm not expecting you to walk in and play house. This is a business arrangement until we both decide it's something more. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't press for anything you're not ready to give." Claire studied his profile, the strong nose and firm jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into sun and wind. This was not the speech of a desperate man looking for easy companionship. This was the speech of someone who had been hurt and was determined not to inflict that hurt on someone else. "I appreciate that," she said quietly, "and I'll offer the same honesty in return. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. My husband died 2 years ago, and his family made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay in Philadelphia. I can cook, clean, sew, tend animals. I've worked in factories and boarding houses. I'm not afraid of hard work." "But," Nathan prompted, hearing the unspoken qualification, "but I won't lie and say I'm looking for love. I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore." Claire's voice was steady, but the admission cost her something. "What I can offer is honest labor, fair treatment, and time. If there's something more to be built between us, it'll have to grow slow, like crops." Nathan considered this, his hands steady on the reins. "That's more honesty than I expected. Most women answering advertisements like mine are eager to lock things down quick. I'm not most women. I'm starting to see that." The wagon crested a final rise and the ranch spread out before them. It was smaller than Claire had imagined, but somehow more real. A cabin sat nestled against a rocky slope, smoke rising from its chimney in a thin gray ribbon. A barn leaned slightly to one side but looked sturdy enough. A corral held several horses and chickens scratched in a pen near the cabin. It was nothing like Philadelphia. There were no neighbors visible, no streets, no sounds of industry or commerce, just land and sky and the vast silence of winter. Claire realized she was holding her breath. This was it. This would be her home if she could make it work, if she could prove herself worthy of the second chance Nathan Holloway was offering. "It's real," she said softly. Nathan glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean it's not just words on paper. You built this, with your own hands." She looked at him. "That means something." Nathan's expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He had expected disappointment, she realized. He had braced himself for her to take one look at this rough homestead and ask to go back to town. Instead, she felt something close to relief. This place was honest. It promised nothing but what it was: shelter, hard work, and the chance to earn a life through effort. After 2 years of pretty lies and false sympathies in Philadelphia, that honesty was more valuable than any mansion. Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop near the cabin. Before he could help her down, the door opened and a boy appeared. He was small for 8, thin in the way of children who had known hunger or grief or both. His dark hair needed cutting, and his clothes were clean but worn. But it was his eyes that caught Claire's attention. They were old eyes in a young face, wary and assessing. "Tommy, this is Miss Brennan," Nathan said. "She'll be helping out around here." The boy studied Claire with an intensity that would have been rude in an adult, but was merely cautious in a child who had learned not to trust easily. "Ma'am," he said finally, the word formal and distant. Claire climbed down from the wagon, ignoring Nathan's offered hand. She needed to stand on her own feet for this. She walked to where Tommy stood and crouched down so their eyes were level. "You can call me Claire," she said gently. "What are you cooking?" The boy's eyes flicked to the cabin where a pot sat on the stove, visible through the open door. "Beans. That's all I know how to make." "Well, I know how to make them taste better. Would you like to learn?" Tommy hesitated, then nodded. It was a small gesture, but Claire saw Nathan's shoulders relax slightly. First hurdle cleared. Inside the cabin was exactly what she had expected. One large room dominated by a cast-iron stove that served for both heating and cooking, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner neatly made with what looked like military precision, a ladder leading to a loft where Tommy presumably slept. Shelves held supplies books and a few personal items. Everything was clean and organized, but there was no softness anywhere. No curtains, no rugs, no small touches that made a house feel like a home. Nathan carried in her trunk and set it beside the bed. "You'll take this. I'll bunk with Tommy in the loft." "That's not necessary," Claire began, but Nathan cut her off with a shake of his head. "Yes, it is. For propriety and because you need rest after 3 days on a train. We'll sort out permanent arrangements later." Claire did not argue. She was learning that Nathan's decisions once made were not easily changed. And truthfully, she was exhausted. The weight of the last weeks, the fear and uncertainty, the long journey, all of it pressed down on her like a physical burden. "Thank you," she said simply. Nathan showed her where things were kept. Water bucket by the door to be filled from the creek when weather permitted from melted snow, when it did not. Flour and cornmeal in sealed tins to keep out mice. Coffee in a jar on the shelf. Beans, dried meat, a few precious jars of preserves. The supplies of people who planned for lean times. Claire assessed the stores with a practiced eye. Enough for 3 people through winter if they were careful. If they were very careful. She made mental notes about rationing, about stretching what they had. As evening fell, she took over the cooking without being asked. Tommy watched her from the loft, his eyes following her movements with the careful attention of a child who had learned that adults could disappear without warning. Claire moved slowly, deliberately, showing him what she was doing without making a lesson of it. She added herbs to the bean scraps saved from earlier cooking that Nathan had not known what to do with. She made biscuits from flour and lard, simple but filling. She brewed coffee strong enough to chase away the cold that had settled into her bones. When she called them to eat, Nathan looked at the table with something close to wonder. It was just beans and biscuits, nothing fancy. But it was more care than had gone into a meal in this cabin for a long time. They ate in silence, but it was the comfortable silence of people too hungry and tired to waste energy on words. Claire watched Nathan and Tommy from the corner of her eye, noting the way the boy unconsciously mimicked the man's movements. Nathan was raising this child without even realizing it, teaching him through example rather than instruction. After supper, Claire washed the dishes while Nathan added wood to the stove. Tommy pulled out a book and struggled through a few pages, sounding out words with painful slowness. Claire did not interfere, but she made a mental note. Tomorrow, if they had time, she would work with him on reading. The wind picked up as darkness fell, rattling the shutters. Nathan went to the window and stood there for a long moment, his expression troubled. "Storm's coming," he said quietly. Claire joined him at the window. The sky had turned the color of old iron and snow was beginning to fall again. Not the gentle flakes of earlier, but hard pellets driven by wind that moaned around the cabin corners. "How bad?" she asked. Nathan's jaw was tight. "Bad enough. December storms here can last for days. We'll need to check the animals before it gets worse." "I'll come with you." "No, you just got here. You're not ready for—" "Then teach me," Claire interrupted. "You said in your letter this was a partnership. Partners don't sit by the fire while the other one freezes. And what happens if something goes wrong out there, if you get hurt or lost? Tommy needs someone who knows what to do." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "You're right. But you follow my instructions exactly. No arguing, no hesitation. Out there in a storm, one mistake can kill you." "Understood." Nathan pulled out a coil of heavy rope. "We'll tie one end to the porch post, the other to my belt. You hold the rope with one hand and my belt with the other. If visibility goes to zero, the rope is our only way back." Claire felt a flutter of fear in her stomach, but she pushed it down. This was the reality of the life she had chosen. No turning back now. They dressed in layers, Nathan lending her a coat that was too big but far warmer than her own. He wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed. Then he tied the rope to the porch post with knots that would not slip no matter how hard the wind pulled. "Ready?" he asked. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan opened the door, and the storm roared in. Snow flew across the floor, melting instantly near the stove. The wind was a living thing clawing at them, trying to push them back inside. Nathan leaned into it and stepped out. Claire grabbed his belt with one hand, the rope with the other, and followed. The world disappeared in an instant. There was no sky, no ground, only white. The wind screamed in her ears, drowning out thought. Snow stung her exposed skin like thrown sand. Nathan moved forward with grim determination, and Claire held on with every ounce of strength she possessed. She lost all sense of direction within seconds. They could have been walking in circles for all she knew. But Nathan moved with confidence, born of experience, counting steps in his head, feeling for landmarks she could not see. His hand struck wood. The barn. Relief flooded through Claire so intensely she nearly stumbled. Nathan found the door and wrestled it open against the wind. They fell inside the sudden absence of wind, almost as disorienting as its presence had been. The barn was dark and warm, filled with the smell of hay and animals. Nathan lit a lantern with shaking hands, and yellow light pushed back the shadows. 3 horses shifted in their stalls, their eyes rolling white with nervousness. Beyond them, 8 cattle stood pressed together for warmth. Chickens huddled in a corner, their usual clucking silenced by fear. Nathan moved down the line of stalls, checking each animal with practiced efficiency. Claire did not wait for instructions. She found the water trough and began breaking the ice that had formed on its surface, smashing it with a piece of wood until dark water showed beneath. The horses drank gratefully. Claire moved to the cattle next, repeating the process. Her hands were already numb, but she kept working. This was why she was here. This was what partnership meant. Nathan finished his inspection and joined her. Together they spread fresh hay, checked hooves for cracks or ice buildup, soothed frightened animals with quiet voices. They worked in tandem, anticipating each other's movements without needing words. It was the kind of coordination that usually took weeks to develop, but necessity compressed time into something more immediate. When they were satisfied the animals would survive the night, Nathan extinguished the lantern. The return journey was no easier than the outward one. If anything, the storm had intensified. The rope was their lifeline, the only thing preventing them from wandering into the white and never finding their way back. Claire's hands were so cold she could barely feel them. Her face was numb. Ice had formed on her eyelashes, and she had to blink constantly to keep them from freezing shut. But she held on to Nathan's belt with grim determination, refusing to be the weak link. When Nathan's hand found the porch post when they stumbled through the door into the blessed warmth of the cabin, Claire's legs nearly gave out. She leaned against the door, breathing hard as Nathan secured the latch. Tommy had kept the fire burning high. Coffee sat warming on the stove. The boy looked at them with wide eyes, relief plain on his young face. Nathan and Claire peeled off their snow-covered coats. Ice fell from the fabric in chunks, melting into puddles on the floor. Claire's hands shook so badly she could barely unbutton her coat. Nathan took over without asking, his own hands steadier but still trembling. He guided her to a chair by the stove and poured coffee into a tin cup. Claire wrapped both hands around it, barely feeling the heat through her numb fingers. She sipped carefully, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Nathan sat across from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. His face was red from cold and wind, his eyes tired but alert. He was watching her, assessing whether she would break under the reality of what she had just experienced. Claire met his gaze steadily. "That was just the first check, wasn't it? We'll have to do it again tonight." Nathan nodded slowly. "Probably twice more before morning. Animals need tending, storm or no storm." "Then we should rest while we can." Something in Nathan's expression shifted. Respect, maybe, or the first stirrings of trust. "You did good out there. Didn't panic. Didn't freeze up." "I was terrified," Claire admitted, "but terror doesn't make the work go away." Nathan's mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "No, it doesn't." The storm hammered at the cabin walls, finding every crack and gap. The wind's voice rose and fell in eerie harmonies like wolves howling in chorus. Claire thought of the miles of empty prairie surrounding them, of the vast darkness beyond the cabin's thin walls. Out there, the storm ruled absolutely. In here, they had only fire and will and each other. Tommy climbed down from the loft bringing blankets. Without being asked, he had prepared sleeping arrangements, moving things to make room. The boy was more capable than his years suggested, shaped by necessity into someone who could anticipate needs and meet them. "You should sleep, Miss Claire," he said quietly. "You look tired." Claire wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could stay awake all night if needed. But her body betrayed her. Exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. 3 days of travel, the emotional weight of leaving everything behind, the physical shock of the storm, all of it crashed over her at once. "Just for an hour," she murmured. "Wake me when it's time for the next check." Nathan nodded. "I will." Claire lay down on the bed, not bothering to undress. The quilts were heavy and warm, smelling faintly of cedar and wood smoke. She closed her eyes and was asleep in seconds. She woke to Nathan's hand on her shoulder, gentle but insistent. Time to go. The storm had not eased. If anything, it sounded worse. Claire forced herself to sit up to pull on the still damp coat to wrap the scarf around her face again. Her body protested every movement, but she did not hesitate. This time the journey to the barn and back felt almost routine. Almost. The terror was still there, the awareness that one wrong step could mean death. But familiarity bred a kind of grim competence. She knew what to expect now. She knew she could survive it. They repeated the process again near dawn. By the third trip, Claire was moving on instinct alone, her mind floating somewhere above her exhausted body. But she did not complain. Neither did Nathan. This was simply what needed doing. When they returned from the final check, gray light was seeping through the shutters. The storm had not broken, but it had eased slightly. The wind no longer screamed. It merely howled. Claire collapsed into the chair by the stove. Nathan made coffee with hands that shook from exhaustion. Tommy was still asleep in the loft, his young body's need for rest overriding the storm's noise. Nathan handed Claire a cup and sat down across from her. They drank in silence, too tired for words. But in that silence, something had shifted. They had survived the night together. They had worked as a team when failure meant death. That created a bond that no amount of polite conversation could match. "Thank you," Nathan said finally, his voice rough, "for not giving up, for not asking to go back to town." "Where would I go?" Claire asked, and realized it was not just a practical question. She genuinely had nowhere else. This cabin, this man, this frightened boy sleeping in the loft, this was all she had now. Nathan looked at her with those winter sky eyes, seeing more than she wanted him to see. "Even so, you could have broken. You didn't. Neither did you. I'm used to it." "Maybe," Claire said, "but being used to something doesn't make it easier. It just makes you better at hiding how hard it is." Nathan's expression went still. Then slowly he nodded. "That's the truest thing anyone said to me in years." They sat in comfortable silence as the cabin warmed and the coffee worked its magic. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world. But inside, for the first time since Claire had arrived, there was something that felt almost like peace. The cabin was small. The future was uncertain. The storm might last for days. But in that moment, sitting across from a man she barely knew, Claire felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Hope. The feeling was fragile, easily broken. But it was there, a small flame in the darkness, refusing to go out. Morning came without sunlight, just a gradual shift from black to gray. The storm had settled into a rhythm, not screaming but growling, a constant low pressure against the cabin walls. Nathan stood by the window, his coffee growing cold in his hand, watching the world beyond turn into an undifferentiated white. Claire woke stiff and sore, every muscle protesting the previous night's exertion. She had slept in her clothes, and now they felt like a second skin she wanted to shed. But there was no privacy for such luxuries. She sat up carefully, not wanting to wake Tommy, who still slept in the loft above. Nathan turned from the window. "Storm's not done with us yet." It was not a question, so Claire did not answer. She simply stood and began the morning routine, stoking the fire, putting water on to boil, taking inventory of their supplies. The arithmetic was simple and unforgiving. 3 people, finite food, unknown duration. Every meal needed to be calculated, every portion measured. Tommy climbed down from the loft, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He moved quietly, a child accustomed to not drawing attention to himself. Claire watched him assess the adult's moods, checking for danger or disapproval before allowing himself to relax. "Good morning, Tommy," she said gently. "Hungry?" The boy nodded, still wary. Claire made oatmeal, stretching it with extra water to make the portions look larger than they were. She added a precious spoonful of preserves to each bowl, a small kindness that made Tommy's eyes widen. They ate in silence, broken only by the wind. When they finished, Claire washed the dishes while Nathan prepared for another barn check. The routine was already establishing itself, the rhythm of survival overriding the awkwardness of strangers living in close quarters. "I should come," Claire said, not making it a question this time. Nathan studied her, seeing the exhaustion she was trying to hide, weighing it against the practical need for 2 sets of hands. Finally, he nodded. "Bundle up. It's colder today than yesterday." They made the journey through white chaos, the rope their only certainty. In the barn, they worked with efficient silence, each task completed without wasted motion. Claire was learning the animals' personalities, which horse needed gentle handling, which cow kicked if approached from the wrong side. Knowledge earned through necessity, stored away for future use. When they returned to the cabin, Tommy had swept the floor and organized the woodpile. Small tasks, but done without being asked. The boy was trying to prove his worth just as Claire was. They were all performing for each other, hoping to be found acceptable. The afternoon stretched long and dim. Nathan taught Claire how to melt snow for water, how to bank the fire so it burned steady without consuming too much wood, how to listen to the wind and judge whether the storm was building or breaking. She absorbed each lesson with focused attention, asking questions only when necessary. Tommy pulled out his reader, struggling through sentences with painful slowness. Claire moved to sit beside him, offering help without judgment. Together they worked through the pages, Claire sounding out the harder words, letting the boy figure out the easier ones himself. Nathan watched from across the room, whittling a piece of wood into something that might become a spoon or a toy. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his attention was on Claire and the boy. Something in his expression had softened, though he would not have admitted it if asked. As evening approached, Nathan prepared for the night check. This time the routine was smooth. Claire knew what to expect, knew how to move in the storm, knew the layout of the barn well enough to work in near darkness. They were becoming a team, forged in necessity, but no less real for it. Back in the cabin, after the animals were tended and the storm door secured, they sat by the fire. The wind had picked up again, hammering at the walls with renewed fury. Tommy was already asleep in the loft, worn out by the day's tensions. Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Claire. "You did good today. With the animals. With Tommy. He's a smart boy. He just needs patient teaching. He hasn't had much of that. I'm not good with words. Better with my hands." Nathan flexed his fingers, calloused and scarred from years of hard work. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Children need both. Someone to teach them to work and someone to teach them to think. "Is that what you're offering? To be the one who teaches him to think? I'm offering to try." Claire met his eyes. "But I want honesty between us, Nathan. No false expectations. I came here running from scandal, not seeking redemption. If you're hoping I'll transform into some kind of frontier saint, you'll be disappointed." Nathan's mouth quirked in something that might have been amusement. "I'm not looking for a saint. I'm looking for someone who won't quit when things get hard. You've proven that already." "One storm doesn't prove anything." "No," Nathan agreed, "but it's a start." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the wind's fury. Claire felt the exhaustion of the day settling into her bones, but there was satisfaction in it too. She had worked hard. She had contributed. She had earned her place at least for today. "Can I ask why you really wrote that advertisement?" The question came out before she could stop it. Nathan was quiet for so long Claire thought he would not answer. Then slowly he began to speak. "I was disappearing. 5 years alone out here, and I felt like I was fading into the quiet. Whole days would pass without me speaking a word. I'd forget what my own voice sounded like. He stared into his coffee cup as if it held answers. And Tommy, he was going the same way. 8 years old and already turning into a ghost. I realized if I didn't do something, we'd both just fade away completely. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Claire understood what it had cost him to speak those words, to admit to weakness. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly. "In Philadelphia, I was surrounded by thousands of people, but I was invisible. Just another pair of hands in the factory, another body on the street. I could have disappeared and no one would have noticed." "I would have noticed," Nathan said. "If you'd never come, I would have known something was missing." Claire looked at him in surprise. "You didn't even know me." "No, but I knew what I was hoping for when I wrote those letters. Someone honest, someone strong, someone who understood that survival out here means more than just staying alive. It means finding reasons to want to." The words settled into Claire's chest, warming her more than the fire or the coffee. She had not expected poetry from this rough, silent man, but perhaps silence taught people to make their words count when they finally spoke them. Before she could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Both of them froze. No one traveled in weather like this unless driven by dire necessity. Nathan stood his hand, instinctively moving to where a rifle hung on the wall. "Stay back." He opened the door cautiously. Snow and wind burst in, and with it came two figures bundled beyond recognition. Nathan pulled them inside quickly, slamming the door against the storm. When the figures unwrapped their scarves and shook off the snow, Claire's stomach tightened. Grace Bishop stood in the cabin, her daughter Elizabeth beside her. Both were covered in snow, their faces red from cold, but Grace's eyes were sharp and assessing as they swept the small space. "Nathan," Grace said, her voice carrying false warmth, "I was so worried about you in this storm. I brought supplies." She held out a basket covered with a cloth. Nathan took it reluctantly, setting it on the table without looking inside. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Bishop, but we're managing fine." "Of course you are." Grace's gaze found Claire, and something cold flickered in her eyes. "Miss Brennan, I didn't expect to see you still here." Claire stood, keeping her voice level. "Where else would I be?" "Oh, I thought perhaps the reality of frontier life might have sent you back to Philadelphia on the next train." Grace's smile was sharp as broken glass. "It's not for everyone after all." Elizabeth Bishop looked uncomfortable. Her young face flushed with more than cold. She was perhaps 22, pretty in a conventional way with her mother's features, but none of her hardness. Yet. "Mother brought food because she thought you might be running low," Elizabeth said quietly, as if trying to soften her mother's barbs. "We appreciate the thought," Nathan said firmly. "But as I said, we're managing." Grace moved around the cabin with proprietary ease, examining everything. Claire felt her presence like an invasion, this woman judging her cooking, her cleaning, her very existence in this space. "Such a cozy arrangement," Grace said, her tone making it sound sordid. "3 people in such close quarters. I'm sure the town will have opinions about that." Nathan's jaw tightened. "The town's opinions are none of my concern, Mrs. Bishop." "Perhaps they should be. Reputation matters, Nathan, especially for a man trying to raise a boy." Grace's eyes flicked to the loft where Tommy slept. "People will question your judgment." Claire felt anger rise in her chest, hot and sharp. This woman had come here not out of kindness, but to intimidate, to stake some kind of claim on Nathan's life. But before Claire could speak, Nathan cut through the tension with quiet force. "Miss Brennan is here as my employee and Tommy's governess. Anyone questioning that can answer to me directly." The words were mild, but the steel beneath them was unmistakable. Grace's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Of course. I'm simply concerned for your standing in the community. You know how people talk." "Then let them talk." Nathan moved to the door, opening it in clear dismissal. "Thank you for the supplies, Mrs. Bishop, but you should head back before the storm gets worse." Grace gathered her dignity like armor. "Come, Elizabeth, we've done our Christian duty here." Elizabeth followed her mother to the door, but she paused and turned back to Claire. I hope you'll be very happy here, Miss Brennan." The words were simple, but the sincerity in them was unexpected. Claire nodded, seeing in the young woman's eyes a kind of desperate hope, as if Elizabeth were witnessing an escape she wished she could make herself. When they were gone, Nathan shut the door and leaned against it, his eyes closed. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "I've made trouble for you." Nathan opened his eyes. "You didn't make anything. She did." He moved back to the fire, his movements tight with suppressed anger. "Grace Bishop has been trying to marry her daughter to me for 2 years. This just made her more determined." "Why you—" "My land borders theirs. Her brother Marlowe wants to control the whole valley. Marriage between Elizabeth and me would give him access to my water rights." Nathan's voice was bitter. "It's always about the land out here. Always." Claire absorbed this information, understanding now the full complexity of what her presence meant. She was not just an employee or a potential wife. She was a tactical obstacle in someone else's game. What will she do now? Nathan looked at her, his expression grim. "Whatever she thinks will drive you away. Grace doesn't accept defeat easily." From the loft, Tommy's voice came small and frightened. "Are they gone?" "Yes, son," Nathan called up. "They're gone." "Good. I don't like Mrs. Bishop. She's mean." Nathan and Claire exchanged glances. Out of the mouths of children came truth that adults learn to hide. The rest of the evening passed quietly. They shared a simple supper from their own stores, leaving Grace's basket unopened. There was something defiant in that small act, a refusal to accept charity that came wrapped in judgment. When it came time to sleep, Claire realized the sleeping arrangements would need to change. The cabin was too small for false modesty, and they were all too exhausted to maintain pretense. "The bed is big enough for both of us if we put a rolled blanket down the middle," she said practically. "You'll break your back on that cot, and we all need real rest." Nathan hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. Finally he nodded. "If you're certain." They arranged the barrier with care, a symbolic boundary that satisfied convention if nothing else. Claire lay down on her side, Nathan on his, the rolled blanket between them like a wall. Tommy was already asleep in the loft, his soft breathing a counterpoint to the storm's roar. In the darkness, Claire found herself acutely aware of Nathan's presence. She could hear him breathing, could feel the slight dip in the mattress from his weight. It was strange and intimate and oddly comforting all at once. "Nathan," she whispered. "Yeah. What you said earlier about disappearing into the quiet, I understand that more than you know." A pause. Then, "What was it like in Philadelphia?" Claire chose her words carefully. "Loud. Always loud. Machines and voices and church bells and horses on cobblestones. But none of it meant anything. It was just noise filling up the emptiness. And now the silence means something. It's not empty. It's just waiting to be filled with things that matter." Nathan was quiet for so long Claire thought he had fallen asleep. But then his voice came through the darkness, rough with emotion. "I'm glad you came, Claire. Whatever happens, whatever Grace Bishop or anyone else does, I'm glad you're here." Claire felt something tighten in her chest. "So am I." They fell asleep like that, separated by fabric, but connected by something more fragile and more enduring. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, 3 people who had been alone were learning slowly and carefully how to be something else. The storm broke on the 3rd day, with the same suddenness with which it had arrived. Claire woke to sunlight streaming through the shutters so bright it hurt her eyes. The silence was almost painful after days of constant wind. Nathan was already up, standing at the window with a cup of coffee. When Claire joined him, the view took her breath away. The world had been transformed into something alien and beautiful. Snow lay in drifts as high as the cabin's roof in some places, sculpting the landscape into new shapes. The sky was achingly blue, hard and clear as glass. "It's over," Nathan said, though whether he meant the storm or their isolation Claire could not tell. Tommy scrambled down from the loft, drawn by the light. Together the 3 of them stood at the window, taking in the changed world. "Can we go outside?" Tommy asked, his voice holding the first hint of childish excitement Claire had heard from him. After we check on the animals, Nathan said. They've been cooped up as long as we have. The journey to the barn was both easier and harder than the storm runs had been. Easier because they could see where they were going. Harder because the snow was deep enough to require wading through drifts that came up to Claire's thighs in places. In the barn, they found the animals restless but alive. One chicken had died frozen despite the barn's protection, but the rest had survived. Nathan carried the dead bird out without comment. On the frontier, death was common enough not to require mourning-only acknowledgement. They spent the morning digging out creating paths between cabin and barn, clearing snow from the roof before its weight could cause damage. It was back-breaking work, but there was a kind of joy in it, too. They were emerging from siege, reclaiming their space from winter's assault. Around midday, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark speck against the white. As he drew closer, Claire recognized the older man from Nathan's description. Jack McCulloch, the ranch foreman, a grizzled veteran in his 50s who had worked for Nathan since the beginning. Jack dismounted with the stiffness of a man who had ridden hard. "Boss, glad to see you made it through." "Jack," Nathan clasped his hand. "How's the herd?" "Lost 3 head. Could have been worse. Found them frozen up in the North Canyon." Jack's eyes moved to Claire, assessing. "Ma'am." "This is Claire Brennan," Nathan said. "She'll be helping with the household and Tommy." Jack's expression remained carefully neutral. "Ma'am," he repeated. "Welcome to Wyoming." Claire recognized the reservation in his voice, the wait-and-see attitude of a man who had learned not to trust too quickly. That was fair. She would have to earn his respect just as she was earning Nathan's. "There's coffee inside," she offered, "and I can heat up some food if you're hungry." Jack's weathered face softened slightly. "That'd be kind, ma'am." Inside, while Claire prepared a meal, Jack and Nathan talked ranch business. Fences down cattle scattered the north pasture fence cut clean through in 2 places. "Cut?" Nathan's voice went hard. "Not broken by the storm." "Cut with wire cutters, clean edges both places." Jack's jaw was tight. "Happened during the storm most likely. Whoever did it knew we couldn't check fences in that weather." Claire felt the temperature in the room drop, though the fire still burned hot. This was the complication Nathan had mentioned, the powerful neighbor who wanted his land. "Marlowe Bishop," Nathan said flatly. "Can't prove it," Jack warned. "But it's his style. Make it look natural, make it hard to prove." "What does cutting fences accomplish?" Claire asked, setting food on the table. Both men looked at her, and she saw Jack's assessment shift slightly. She had asked the right question, the practical one. "Cattle wander through onto Bishop's land," Nathan explained. "Then he claims they're strays, or that my poor management is causing problems for his operation, gives him leverage to push for selling. Or," Jack added grimly, "gives him excuse to call in authorities, claim Nathan's operation is a danger to the community." Claire absorbed this, understanding the trap. In a place where law was still rough and authority often belonged to whoever could claim it, most convincingly, a man like Bishop could manufacture crises and then offer to solve them by taking what he wanted. "What can we do?" she asked. Jack looked at Nathan, surprised. "She knows about the situation." "She's part of this household now," Nathan said. "She should know what she's walking into." Something in Jack's expression shifted again, this time toward cautious approval. A man who included a woman in serious discussions was a man who respected competence over convention. They spent the afternoon strategizing. Jack would ride out and document the fence damage, take photographs if possible, gather evidence. Nathan would repair the fences and round up the scattered cattle. Claire would maintain the household and watch Tommy. It was practical, pragmatic, and left Claire feeling oddly helpless. She was used to contributing through labor, through visible work. Being relegated to the domestic sphere felt like a diminishment of her value. That evening, after Jack had ridden back to the line shack where he stayed during winter, Nathan found Claire staring out the window at the darkening landscape. "Something wrong?" he asked. "I want to help. Really help, not just cook and clean." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You are helping. Tommy's reading better already. The cabin feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep between work shifts. That matters. but it doesn't fix cut fences or stop Bishop from taking your land." "No," Nathan admitted, "but it gives me a reason to fight for it. Before you came, I was starting to think it didn't matter, that I could just sell out, move on, start over somewhere else. I'd done it before." Claire turned to face him. What changed? Nathan's eyes held hers, and in them she saw something vulnerable and honest. "You changed things. You came all this way, trusted me enough to step into this situation. How could I give up now? What would that say about me?" "That you were practical. That you knew when to cut your losses. Or that I was a coward who ran when things got hard." Nathan shook his head. "I've run before. From my father's ranch, from my brother's betrayal, from my wife's death. I'm tired of running." The words hung between them, weighted with history Claire only partially understood. She wanted to ask about the wife, about the betrayal, about all the scars that had shaped this quiet, careful man. But the questions felt too intrusive, too presumptuous for someone who had only been here 3 days. Instead, she said, "Then we fight. Together. However we can." Nathan's expression softened. "Together. I like the sound of that." They were standing close, Claire realized. Close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes, could smell the wood smoke and leather scent that clung to his clothes. Close enough that if she leaned forward just slightly, she could rest her forehead against his shoulder. She did not lean forward. It was too soon, too complicated, too many other pressures already weighing on them both. But the temptation was there, and from the way Nathan's breathing had changed, he felt it too. Tommy's voice from the loft broke the moment. "Miss Claire, can you help me with my reading?" Claire stepped back, putting safe distance between herself and temptation. "Of course, Tommy. I'll be right up." That night they shared the bed again with the rolled blanket between them. But the barrier felt more symbolic than real, now a gesture toward propriety that both of them understood was becoming increasingly hollow. In the darkness, Nathan's voice came soft. "Claire. Yes. Thank you. For staying. For not running when you saw how complicated this is. I told you in my letters, I'm not afraid of complicated, I'm afraid of emptiness." "There's no emptiness here. Not anymore." Claire smiled in the darkness. "No, there isn't." She fell asleep listening to Nathan's breathing, feeling oddly safe despite the troubles that surrounded them. Outside, the world was cold and dangerous and full of people who wished them ill. But inside this cabin with this man and this child, Claire felt something she had not felt in years. She felt like she belonged. The feeling would be tested soon enough. But for that night it was enough to hold on to cherish, to keep close like a candle flame cupped against the wind. The next day brought trouble riding a fine bay mare. Dr. Samuel Garrett arrived just after breakfast, his black bag suggesting a professional call, though no one had sent for him. Nathan met him at the door, concern creasing his face. "Doc, is someone hurt?" "No, Nathan. But I need to speak with you. About Miss Brennan." The doctor's voice was grave and his eyes flicked to where Claire stood by the stove. "In private would be best. Anything you have to say you can say in front of her." Nathan's voice was firm, protective. Dr. Garrett dismounted and came inside, snow falling from his coat. He was in his early 60s, with the weathered face of a man who had seen too much suffering and the kind eyes of someone who still cared about it. He looked at Claire with sympathy. "Miss Brennan, I apologize for intruding, but Grace Bishop came to see me yesterday. She's spreading stories about you, about your late husband's death." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "I see. She's saying he was poisoned, that you did it for insurance money." Dr. Garrett's voice was gentle, but the words struck like blows. "I came because I wanted you to hear it from me first, before the whole town is talking." Nathan moved to stand beside Claire, his presence solid and anchoring. "And what do you believe, Doc?" Dr. Garrett pulled papers from his bag. "I believe in evidence. I took the liberty of contacting Thomas Brennan's physician in Philadelphia. Telegrams are expensive, but I felt it was worth the cost." He spread the papers on the table. Thomas Brennan had a congenital heart defect documented by 3 different physicians over 5 years. He was expected to die young regardless of any external factors. Relief and anger warred in Claire's chest. Relief that someone believed her, anger that she needed to be believed at all. "His family claimed I poisoned him," she said quietly. "The police investigated. The insurance company investigated. Neither found any evidence because there was none. But that didn't stop the rumors. Eventually I had to leave Philadelphia because everyone believed the whispers over the facts." Dr. Garrett nodded sympathetically. "Grace Bishop is counting on that. She knows people believe gossip more readily than truth. She's already told half the town, and by tomorrow the other half will know." "Why?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "What does she gain from destroying me?" "She wants you gone," Nathan said flatly. "She thinks if you leave, she can still push her daughter at me." "There's more," Dr. Garrett said grimly. "Marlowe Bishop is planning to use this at the town council meeting next week. He's proposing some kind of morality clause for landowners. Says people of questionable character shouldn't be receiving government benefits." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "My land is paid for. No government grants involved." "He'll find another angle. Water rights, probably. Or he'll claim your association with Miss Brennan makes you unstable, unfit to manage land responsibly." Dr. Garrett looked apologetic. "I'm sorry, Nathan, but you need to be prepared for a fight." Tommy had been listening from the loft, his young face pale. Now he climbed down and stood before Claire, his expression fierce despite his small size. "Miss Claire, did you kill your husband?" The directness of it, the lack of adult circumlocution cut through the tension. Claire knelt down to look Tommy in the eye. "No, Tommy, I didn't." The boy studied her face for a long moment, then nodded decisively. "Okay." The simple faith of it nearly broke Claire's composure. This child who had known her only days trusted her more readily than a city full of adults who had known her husband. "Thank you, Tommy," she whispered. Nathan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Go check on the chickens, son. Make sure they have water." When Tommy had bundled up and gone outside, Nathan turned back to Dr. Garrett. "What can we do?" "Document everything. I'll write a formal statement about Thomas Brennan's medical history. I'll stand witness to Miss Brennan's character if needed." The doctor's jaw was set. "Marlowe Bishop may own half the town, but he doesn't own me." Claire felt gratitude surge through her. "Why would you do this for me? You don't know me." Dr. Garrett's expression was sad. "Because I've seen what Marlowe Bishop does to people who get in his way. He ruined a good man 2 years ago, drove him off his land with legal harassment and social pressure. That man died 6 months later, broken and penniless. I swore then I wouldn't stand by and let it happen again." "Who was he?" Nathan asked. "The man who died? Samuel Hartford. Had a small ranch east of here. Bishop wanted his water access." Dr. Garrett shook his head. "Hartford wrote letters to the territorial governor documenting Bishop's harassment. He died before he could send them. His widow sold the land to Bishop for a fraction of its worth and left Wyoming forever." Claire and Nathan exchanged glances. This was the pattern then. Harassment, isolation, pressure, until the victim either sold or fled. "I'm not fleeing," Claire said firmly. "And I'm not selling." "It's not your land to sell," Dr. Garrett pointed out gently. "No, but it's my reputation, my life." Claire lifted her chin. "And I'm not giving Grace Bishop the satisfaction of seeing me run." Nathan's hand found hers, squeezing briefly. "Then we stand together. At the council meeting, at church, wherever Bishop wants to make his play. We stand together, and we tell the truth." Dr. Garrett smiled, the first real warmth breaking through his professional demeanor. "You've found yourself a good woman, Nathan. Don't let her go." After the doctor left, Claire and Nathan stood in the cabin, the weight of what was coming settling over them like fresh snow. "I should have told you," Claire said, "about the accusations. I should have been honest from the start." "Would I have still sent for you?" Nathan's voice was thoughtful rather than accusatory. "I don't know. That's why I didn't tell you." Nathan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "I'm glad you came, Claire. Even knowing this, even knowing it makes everything harder, I'm glad you're here." Claire looked up at him, seeing the honesty in his eyes, the determination in the set of his jaw. This was a man who had been betrayed before, who had every reason to doubt and mistrust. Yet he was choosing to believe her, choosing to stand with her. Something shifted in her chest, a wall she had built beginning to crack. She had come here expecting nothing but practical arrangement. She had not expected this fierce protective instinct, this willingness to fight for her when he barely knew her. "Nathan," she whispered, "I didn't kill him. I swear on everything I hold dear I didn't." "I know." The certainty in his voice steadied her. "I believe you." And somehow those three simple words meant more than any declaration of affection could have. "I believe you." Believe. In a world that had condemned her without trial, those words were water in a desert. Claire stepped closer, resting her forehead against Nathan's chest. His arms came around her, tentative at first, then firmer. They stood like that for a long moment, drawing strength from each other, preparing for the battle they both knew was coming. Outside, Tommy's laughter rang out as he chased chickens through the snow. Inside, two damaged people held each other and silently vowed not to break. The war with Marlowe Bishop had begun, and they would face it together whatever the cost. In the days that followed, a deceptive calm settled over the ranch. The days following Dr. Garrett's visit passed with deceptive calm. Nathan worked from dawn to dusk, repairing fences, rounding up scattered cattle, preparing for whatever move Marlowe Bishop would make next. Claire threw herself into domestic work with fierce determination, as if perfect meals and a spotless cabin could somehow shield them from the storm gathering on the horizon. But the town did not forget. The town never forgot. A few days after Dr. Garrett's warning, Nathan had to ride into Sagebrush for supplies. Claire insisted on coming with him, and though Nathan argued about the cold and the potential confrontation, he eventually relented. Tommy stayed behind with Jack, who had moved into the small bunkhouse attached to the barn for the winter. The ride to town was quiet, both of them bracing for what awaited. As they entered Sagebrush's main street, Claire felt the weight of eyes upon her. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Women pulled their children closer. Men stared with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Nathan helped her down from the wagon in front of Chen's general store, his hand lingering on her arm in a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed. Inside the store, Mr. Chen greeted them with careful courtesy. The Chinese merchant was in his 60s, his face lined with the wisdom of someone who had survived more than one kind of persecution. "Mr. Holloway, Miss Brennan." He inclined his head respectfully. "What can I get for you today?" Nathan handed over his list. As Mr. Chen began gathering supplies, Claire became aware of the other customers in the store. Two women from the church stood near the fabric section, whispering behind their hands. A ranch hand leaned against the counter, watching Claire with undisguised interest. Then Grace Bishop entered her presence, filling the small space like cold air. She swept past Claire without acknowledgement, moving to the counter where Nathan stood. "Mr. Holloway, I'm glad I caught you. There's a town council meeting tonight. Your presence is requested." "Requested or required?" Nathan's voice was flat. "Let's say strongly encouraged. We'll be discussing matters that affect all landowners in the valley." Grace's smile was sharp. "I do hope you'll attend. 7 o'clock at the town hall." She turned to leave, pausing beside Claire. "Miss Brennan, I trust you're finding frontier life to your liking. It can be so isolating for those unaccustomed to small-town scrutiny." "I'm managing just fine, Mrs. Bishop." "Of course you are." Grace's eyes were cold. "For now." After she left, the store seemed to exhale. Mr. Chen finished packing their supplies, then leaned across the counter, his voice low. "Mr. Holloway, you should know. Bishop has been talking to people, spreading stories about Miss Brennan, about you both." "We know," Nathan said grimly. "More than stories," Mr. Chen continued. "He tells them Miss Brennan murdered her husband. He says you are not thinking clearly, that a woman has clouded your judgment. He says things that make people afraid." Claire felt anger rise hot in her chest, but Mr. Chin was not finished. "I know Bishop. My family lost our store in California to men like him. Same tricks, same lies, same pressure, until you have no choice but to sell." His eyes held steady on Nathan's. "If you need witness someone to speak truth, I will do it. I am not afraid of Bishop." Nathan extended his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Chin. That means more than you know." The merchant shook his hand firmly. "Good people must stand together. Otherwise, bad people always win." That evening, Nathan and Claire rode to the town hall. The building was packed, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. Claire felt the weight of their collective stare, saw the mixture of curiosity, judgment, and hostility on faces that should have been those of neighbors. Mayor Henderson called the meeting to order, his weak chin and nervous eyes betraying a man more concerned with keeping peace than seeking justice. Marlowe Bishop sat in the front row, his handsome face arranged in an expression of civic concern. The early business was routine. Disputes over water rights, discussions about road maintenance proposals for the upcoming spring. Claire barely listened, her attention focused on Marlowe, waiting for the attack she knew was coming. It came after 30 minutes of mundane discussion. Marlowe stood, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "Mayor Henderson, gentlemen, I'd like to address a matter of grave concern for our community's moral standing." Mayor Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "The floor is yours, Mr. Bishop." Marlowe turned to face the assembled crowd, his expression grave. "It has come to my attention that one of our landowners has taken into his household a woman of questionable character, a woman accused of murdering her husband for insurance money." The room erupted in whispers. Claire felt Nathan tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm. "Wait," the gesture said. "Let him finish. Now, I'm not one to spread gossip." Marlowe continued with false modesty. "But when such a person lives unmarried with a man responsible for a young child, when this arrangement threatens the moral fabric of our community, I believe we have a duty to act." Grace Bishop stood from her seat. "If I may, Mr. Mayor, I've taken the liberty of obtaining a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Margaret Brennan of Philadelphia, mother of the deceased Thomas Brennan. She states under oath that Claire Brennan likely poisoned her son for his life insurance policy." She pulled a paper from her bag and handed it to the mayor, who read it with a deepening frown. This was the moment. Claire could feel the room turning against her, could see in their faces the easy acceptance of scandal over truth. She stood, her voice cutting through the whispers. "May I respond, Mr. Mayor?" Henderson looked startled. "Miss Brennan, this is most irregular." "So is being accused of murder without opportunity to defend myself." Marlowe's smile was thin. "By all means, let the lady speak." Claire walked to the front of the room, feeling every eye upon her. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her voice came out steady and clear. "My husband, Thomas Brennan, died of a congenital heart defect. This was documented by 3 separate physicians over a period of 5 years. The Philadelphia police investigated his death. The insurance company investigated his death. The medical examiner investigated his death. All 3 found the same conclusion: natural causes resulting from a known medical condition." She pulled papers from her bag, the documents Dr. Garrett had helped her obtain. "I have the police report, the medical examiner's findings, and a letter from the insurance company stating they paid the claim in full, which they would never do in cases of suspected murder." She spread the papers on the table before the mayor. Mrs. Brennan's accusations were motivated by grief and greed. She wanted the insurance money for herself. When she couldn't get it, she tried to destroy me instead. The room was silent now, people leaning forward to hear. Claire felt a surge of something fierce and strong. She had run from this in Philadelphia. She would not run here. "As for my living arrangement with Mr. Holloway, I am employed as housekeeper and governess. I have my own room. My conduct has been entirely proper. If anyone questions this, they may speak to Dr. Garrett, who has visited the household multiple times and can attest to the propriety of the situation." Dr. Garrett stood from the back of the room. "I can indeed attest. Miss Brennan's character is beyond reproach. And I would add that Thomas Brennan's physician, Dr. William Morrison of Philadelphia, has confirmed in writing the heart condition that killed the young man. Marlowe's expression hardened. How convenient that you've assembled such documentation, almost as if you anticipated being questioned. I've carried these papers for 2 years, Claire said quietly, because I knew accusations are easier to make than to disprove, because I knew that truth matters less than what people want to believe. She looked around the room, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. I came to Wyoming seeking a fresh start. I've asked nothing from this community except the chance to work and live in peace. If that's too much to ask, then perhaps Wyoming isn't the frontier it claims to be. Perhaps it's just Philadelphia, with more space between the gossips. The words landed like stones in still water. Several people shifted uncomfortably. One man in the back actually nodded. Nathan stood moving to Claire's side. Miss Brennan is under my protection and employed by my household. Anyone who questions her character is questioning mine. I stand by her completely. The declaration hung in the air. Marlowe's face flushed with anger, poorly concealed. How noble, Holloway! But the question remains whether your judgment is sound. A man who would bring such a woman into his home, expose a child to such influence. That's enough. The voice came from an unexpected source. Elizabeth Bishop rose from her seat beside her mother, her young face flushed but determined. Father, you've made your point. But Miss Brennan has answered the accusations with evidence. Can we not accept that and move on? Grace turned to her daughter with fury in her eyes. Elizabeth, sit down. No, Mother. The words were quiet but firm. This isn't justice. It's persecution. The room erupted in shocked whispers. A bishop daughter defying her parents publicly was unprecedented. Marlowe's face went dark with rage. Mayor Henderson seized the moment. I believe we've heard enough on this matter. Miss Brennan has provided documentation supporting her claims. Unless there is new evidence to present, I suggest we table this discussion and move on to other business. There is other business, Marlowe said through clenched teeth. The matter of fence cutting on my property. Cattle from the Holloway Ranch have been trespassing, causing damage. I'm requesting a formal survey of the boundary line. Nathan's jaw tightened. My fences were cut during the storm. Deliberately cut, not broken. I have photographs. Photographs can be staged, Marlowe countered. The survey will reveal the truth. The mayor looked between them, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. Very well. A survey will be commissioned at Mr. Bishop's expense, as he is the one requesting it. The results will be presented at next month's meeting. It was a compromise that satisfied no one but ended the immediate confrontation. The meeting continued with mundane business, but Claire barely heard it. She had survived the first assault, but the war was far from over. As people filed out after adjournment, Claire found herself face to face with Elizabeth Bishop. The young woman's eyes were red as if she had been crying. Miss Brennan, I apologize for my parents. What they're doing isn't right. Why did you speak up? Claire asked gently. It'll cost you. Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. It already has, but I'm tired of being part of their schemes, tired of being used as bait to trap a man who doesn't want me. She glanced at Nathan, who stood nearby talking with Dr. Garrett. You're braver than I am. You chose your own path. So can you, Claire said. Can I? Elizabeth's voice was wistful. Where would I go? What would I do? I'm not like you. I haven't worked in factories or learned to survive on my own. You could learn, Elizabeth smiled sadly. Perhaps, but not today. Today I need to face my mother's wrath for embarrassing her in public. She squeezed Claire's hand briefly. Good luck, Miss Brennan. You'll need it. The ride back to the ranch was silent until they were well outside town. Then Nathan spoke, his voice rough with emotion. You were magnificent in there. The way you stood up, presented evidence, didn't back down. I've never seen anything like it. Claire's hands trembled on the reins, the adrenaline finally wearing off. I was terrified. You didn't show it. That's what 2 years of being whispered about teaches you. How to hide fear behind dignity. Nathan reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. You don't have to hide it from me. Not ever." Claire looked at him, seeing in the fading light the strong lines of his face, the steadiness in his gray eyes. Something in her chest loosened a knot she had been carrying since Thomas's death, finally beginning to unravel. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." "All right." "I didn't love my husband. I married him because I was alone and scared, and he offered safety. When he died, I cried. But not from grief, from relief that I wouldn't have to pretend anymore." The confession came out in a rush. "What kind of person does that make me?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "It makes you honest. Most people lie about things like that, pretend the dead were better than they were. You're telling the truth. The truth is ugly sometimes. Yes, but it's still better than pretty lies." Nathan squeezed her hand. "My wife Rebecca was sweet and kind and completely unsuited to frontier life. I knew it when I married her, but I did it anyway because I thought love would be enough. It wasn't. She died in childbirth, and part of me has always wondered if I killed her by bringing her here." Claire's breath caught. "Nathan, that's not... Isn't it? I knew the risks. I knew we were 20 miles from the nearest doctor. I knew she was fragile. But I wanted a wife and a family, so I took the risk with her life." His voice was raw. "The baby lived for 5 minutes, long enough for me to hold him, long enough to name him, not long enough to matter." "What did you name him?" Claire asked softly. "Daniel, after my father." Nathan's hand tightened on hers. "The father who chose my brother over me, who believed lies about my character, who died without speaking to me again. I named my son after him, and the boy died anyway. Sometimes I think it was God's judgment on my pride." "That's not how God works," Claire said firmly. "No. How does he work then?" Claire looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I don't know. But I know he doesn't punish babies for their father's sins. Daniel died because babies die sometimes. Rebecca died because childbirth is dangerous, not because you were being punished." Nathan's eyes glistened in the starlight. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it, and stop carrying guilt that isn't yours to carry." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, the silence of two people who had shown each other their scars and not looked away. At the ranch, Tommy ran out to meet them, his young face anxious. "How was the meeting? Did they make Miss Claire leave?" Nathan swung down from his horse and pulled the boy into a hug. "No, son. Miss Claire isn't going anywhere." Tommy turned to Claire as she dismounted. "Good, because I like her." The simple declaration offered with a child's absolute sincerity made Claire's eyes sting with tears. She knelt down and hugged Tommy close. "I like you too." That night, after Tommy was asleep and the cabin was quiet, Nathan and Claire sat by the fire. The rolled blanket still separated their sides of the bed, but it felt increasingly symbolic, a gesture toward propriety that both of them knew was becoming meaningless. "Nathan," Claire said into the darkness. "Yeah. What happens next with Bishop, I mean?" "He'll push the survey, try to find some way to claim my land is actually his or that I've violated some boundary agreement." Nathan's voice was tired. "And he'll keep spreading rumors, keep trying to isolate us socially until we have no allies left. So what do? We keep fighting. We document everything. We build our case." A pause. "And we hope that right wins over might." "You don't sound convinced." "I've seen too many good people lose to powerful ones. Seen too many times where having truth on your side didn't matter because the other person had money and influence." Nathan shifted in the bed. "But I'm not giving up. Not this time." Claire felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. "Neither am I." They fell asleep like that, separated by fabric, but united in purpose. Outside, winter pressed down on the land with cold indifference. Inside, two people made silent vows to stand against whatever was coming. The new year arrived without celebration. January brought temperatures so cold the air itself seemed to freeze, and winds that cut through clothing like knives. Nathan worked himself to exhaustion repairing fences, tending animals, preparing for the survey that would come when weather permitted. Claire managed the household with fierce efficiency, stretching supplies, teaching Tommy his letters, maintaining a facade of normalcy, while fear gnawed at her constantly. What if Bishop found some legal loophole? What if the survey went against them? What if Nathan lost everything because he had chosen to protect her? On January 7th, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Jack came riding hard just after dawn. His horse lathered despite the cold. Nathan was at the barn when he arrived, and Claire watched from the cabin window as the two men talked, their postures growing increasingly tense. When Nathan came inside, his face was gray. "There's been a fire at Bishop's barn, the one on the disputed boundary." Claire's stomach dropped. And someone saw Jack's horse near there last night. They're saying he set it." The implications hit like a physical blow. If Jack was accused of arson, if he was arrested, Nathan would lose his foreman just when he needed him most. And the accusation would strengthen Bishop's narrative that Nathan and everyone associated with him were dangerous, unstable. "Did he do it?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "Of course not. Jack was here last night. We played cards until past midnight, then he went to the bunkhouse." Nathan's hands clenched into fists. "But Bishop will have witnesses who say otherwise. Paid witnesses, most likely." "Can we prove Jack was here?" "My word. Tommy's, yours. But none of that will carry weight against Bishop's people." Claire thought quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. "What about the cards? Do you still have them?" Nathan looked confused. "Yeah, they're on the table in the bunkhouse." "Why?" "Because if you played cards until midnight, the cards will show it. Specific hands, specific arrangements. Jack can describe the game in detail. So can you." Claire was pacing now, her mind working. "It's not proof, but it's corroboration. And it shows we're not just making up an alibi after the fact." Nathan's eyes brightened. "You're right. I'll go get Jack, have him write down everything he remembers about last night." But before he could move, there was a knock at the door. Nathan opened it to find Deputy Wade, a hard-faced man in his 30s with two other men behind him. "Nathan Holloway, I need to speak with your foreman, Jack McCullough." "What about?" Nathan's voice was carefully neutral. "There was arson last night. Marlowe Bishop's barn burned. We have witnesses placing McCullough at the scene." "What witnesses?" Claire asked, stepping forward. Wade's eyes flicked to her with distaste. "That's not your concern, ma'am." "It is when you're accusing an innocent man." Claire's voice was sharp. "Jack was here last night. We can all testify to that." "Convenient," Wade said flatly. "Of course you'd all lie for each other." The accusation hung in the cold air. Nathan's jaw tightened dangerously. "Be very careful what you're suggesting, Deputy." "I'm suggesting that your foreman needs to come with me for questioning. Now." Jack appeared from the bunkhouse, his weathered face calm despite the circumstances. "I'll come willingly, Deputy. I've got nothing to hide." "Jack, don't." Nathan started, but Jack shook his head. "It's all right, boss. Truth will out. Always does eventually." Wade put Jack in handcuffs with unnecessary roughness. As they led him away, Jack called back, "Take care of the herd, boss, and don't do anything stupid." The last part was directed at Nathan, a warning from a man who knew his employer's protective instincts could lead to rash action. After they left, Nathan stood staring at the empty space where his foreman had been, his whole body vibrating with suppressed fury. Claire touched his arm gently. "We fight this the right way, with law, with evidence, with truth. And if truth doesn't win," Nathan's voice was bitter, "if Bishop's money and influence are stronger than facts, then we appeal to higher authorities, the territorial marshal, the governor, if necessary. But we don't give Bishop an excuse to destroy us." Nathan turned to her, and Claire saw in his eyes a desperation she had not seen before. "If I lose this ranch, Claire, I lose everything. It's all I have left. All I built after my father and brother took everything else." "It's not all you have." Claire took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You have Tommy. You have Jack's loyalty. You have—" She hesitated, then pushed forward. "You have me. Whatever happens to the land, you don't lose us." Something in Nathan's expression cracked. He pulled Claire close, holding her with an intensity that spoke of fear and need and something deeper he could not yet name. Claire held him back, feeling the tremors running through his powerful frame. Understanding that this strong, silent man was closer to breaking than he wanted to admit. From the loft, Tommy's small voice came down. "Are they going to take our house?" Nathan pulled back from Claire, wiping his eyes roughly. "No, son. They're not taking anything, I promise." It was a promise he had no way of keeping, but Claire understood the necessity of it. Children needed to believe in their parents' ability to protect them, even when that belief was built on hope rather than certainty. The next days were a nightmare of legal maneuvering. Nathan hired James Thornton, the only honest lawyer within 50 miles, but Thornton was frank about their chances. "Bishop has 3 witnesses willing to swear they saw Jack near that barn. They'll claim they saw him carrying kerosene, saw him acting suspicious. It's all lies, but it'll sound convincing to a jury." "Can't we prove it's lies?" Nathan demanded. "How? We can't prove they didn't see what they claim to have seen. We can only provide alternative explanations." Thornton spread his hands helplessly. "Your testimony that Jack was here will help, but Bishop's lawyers will argue you're biased, that you'd lie to protect your man." Claire had been quiet, but now she spoke. "What if we had physical evidence, something that proves Bishop's witnesses are lying?" Both men looked at her. Thornton's expression was skeptical. "What kind of evidence? I don't know yet. But Bishop made a mistake bringing in paid witnesses. Liars make mistakes. They contradict themselves, forget details, get facts wrong." Claire's mind was racing. "We need to depose them separately, ask them detailed questions about what they saw. If their stories don't match perfectly, that's reasonable doubt." Thornton looked impressed, despite himself. "That's actually sound strategy. You've got a legal mind, Mrs. Brennan." "Miss," Claire corrected automatically. "And I don't have a legal mind. I just know how liars work. I've been dealing with them for 2 years. Nathan reached for her hand under the table, squeezing briefly. The gesture spoke volumes about how far they had come from the awkward strangers on a train platform 3 weeks ago. The trial was set for 10 days out, giving them precious little time to build a defense. Nathan threw himself into gathering evidence, documenting Jack's presence at the ranch, collecting statements from anyone who might testify to Jack's character. But Bishop was not idle. The general store suddenly refused Nathan credit. The livery stable claimed to be too busy to shoe his horses. Even the church, through Grace Bishop's influence, suggested that perhaps Nathan should worship elsewhere until the moral questions about his household were resolved. The isolation was deliberate and devastating. Cut off from credit and community support, Nathan's resources dwindled rapidly. The lawyers' fees alone consumed most of their savings. Feed for the cattle had to be purchased at inflated prices from Bishop's store, paid in cash. Every day brought new financial pressures, new social ostracism, new evidence that Bishop's reach extended into every corner of their lives. Claire watched Nathan growing harder, more desperate. He slept little, ate less, drove himself with punishing intensity. She worried he would break himself before Bishop ever got the chance. On the 5th night after Jack's arrest, Claire found Nathan in the barn long after midnight, supposedly checking on a cow, but really just standing in the cold darkness, staring at nothing. "You can't do this," she said gently. "Can't do what?" "Destroy yourself trying to save everything else. If you break Nathan, we all fall." "I won't break." But his voice lacked conviction. Claire moved closer, close enough to feel the heat of his body in the frigid air. "Yes, you will. Because you're carrying this alone. You're trying to protect me, protect Tommy, protect Jack, protect the ranch all by yourself. But that's not how partnership works. What do you want me to do? Let you take on Bishop? Let Tommy face the consequences of my fight?" Nathan's voice was raw. "This is my battle." "No, it's our battle. Bishop attacked me first. Remember? Those accusations about my husband, that was directed at me. You just got caught in the crossfire." Claire took his hands, feeling the calluses and scars that told the story of his life. "Let me help carry this. That's what I'm here for." Nathan looked down at their joined hands, and something in him seemed to crack. "I'm scared, Claire. I'm terrified that I'm going to lose everything again, that I'll end up exactly where I was 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and a saddle and the knowledge that I failed." "You didn't fail 5 years ago. You were cheated. Maybe. But I still lost." Nathan's eyes met hers, and in them Claire saw a vulnerability that took her breath away. "I can't lose again. Not this time. Not when it matters so much." "Why does it matter so much?" Claire asked softly, though she thought she knew the answer. Nathan's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Because you're here. Because Tommy's here. Because for the first time since Rebecca died, I have something worth fighting for beyond just survival." The admission hung between them, charged with meaning neither of them was quite ready to name. Claire leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his palm against her cold skin. "Then let me fight with you," she whispered. "Not behind you. Not protected. With you. As equals." Nathan's other hand came up to frame her face, and he looked at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Claire, Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by Tommy's voice calling from the cabin. "Miss Claire, where are you?" They stepped apart quickly, the moment broken, but not forgotten. Claire touched Nathan's arm briefly. "Tomorrow we strategize. Tonight we rest. Together." "Together," Nathan echoed, and the word felt like a promise. The next morning brought a visitor that neither of them expected. Elizabeth Bishop arrived on horseback alone, looking over her shoulder as if afraid of being followed. Claire met her at the door, surprised. "Miss Bishop, this isn't safe for you." "I know, but I had to come." Elizabeth's hands shook as she pulled a ledger from her bag. "I found this in my father's office. I think it might help prove he's behind everything." Nathan took the ledger, flipping through pages of neat entries. His face grew darker with each page. "This documents every property acquisition he's made in the last 5 years, including Samuel Hartford's ranch." "Look at the dates," Elizabeth said urgently. "Look at what happened just before each purchase." Claire read over Nathan's shoulder, her stomach churning. The pattern was unmistakable. Mysterious fires, fences cut, animals killed, legal harassment. And then within months a property sale to Marlowe Bishop at far below market value. "This is evidence of systematic fraud," Nathan said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "This could bring him down." "Can I testify?" Elizabeth asked. "Against my own father." Claire looked at the young woman with new respect. "Do you understand what that would cost you? My family will disown me. The town will shun me. I'll have nothing and nowhere to go." Elizabeth's voice wavered but did not break. "But I can't be part of this anymore. I won't." "You'll have somewhere to go," Claire said firmly. "Here, with us. We'll figure it out." Nathan looked at Claire, a question in his eyes. She met his gaze, steadily nodding. They were taking in strays now, apparently. But what else could they do? The trial was set for the next day. With Elizabeth's ledger and testimony, they had a fighting chance. But Bishop would not go down without a fight, and Claire knew the next 24 hours would determine everything. That night, Claire and Nathan sat at the table long after Tommy and Elizabeth, who was staying in the cabin rather than risk being seen returning home, had gone to sleep. They went over their strategy, rehearsing questions, anticipating counter-arguments. But underneath the practical planning, there was a current of something else. An awareness of how close they were sitting, how their hands kept finding excuses to touch, how Nathan's eyes lingered on Claire's face when he thought she was not looking. Finally, around midnight, Nathan reached across the table and took Claire's hand. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know something." Claire's heart hammered. "What?" "When I wrote that advertisement, I thought I was looking for help, someone to cook and clean and watch Tommy. But that's not what I found. Nathan's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. I found a partner, someone who stands with me instead of behind me, someone who fights as hard as I do and doesn't back down. Nathan, let me finish. His gray eyes held hers. I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. I know there are 1,000 reasons to wait to be practical to keep our distance. But Claire, I care for you. More than I expected, more than I know how to handle. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. I care for you too. But Nathan, I need you to understand something. I don't know if I can love the way you deserve. Thomas took something from me. Or maybe I never had it to begin with. I don't know if I'm capable of the kind of love you're hoping for. Nathan's hand tightened on hers. I'm not asking for grand passion or romantic declarations. I'm asking for honesty, for partnership, for someone who won't quit when things get hard. You've already given me all of that. Is it enough? Claire whispered. It's more than enough. Nathan stood pulling her up with him. Can I kiss you, Claire? The question asked with such careful respect, such clear request for consent, made Claire's heart swell. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Nathan's kiss was gentle at first, tentative, giving her space to pull back if she wanted. But Claire did not pull back. She leaned in her hands, coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more necessary. Nathan's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Claire went willingly, letting herself be held, letting herself feel safe in a way she had not felt in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Bishop throws at us, stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," Claire promised, and she meant it. This rough, damaged man had somehow slipped past all her defenses. She might not be capable of the kind of love novels described, but she was capable of this, choosing him every day deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet cabin, gathering strength for the battle ahead. Tomorrow would bring the trial, the confrontation, the reckoning. But tonight, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse was packed long before the trial's 9 o'clock start time. Every seat was filled, people standing along the walls, craning their necks to see. This was entertainment in a town with little of it drama, better than anything the traveling theater companies could provide. Nathan, Claire, and Elizabeth sat at the defendant's table with James Thornton. Across the aisle, Marlowe Bishop sat with his expensive lawyers from Cheyenne, his face arranged in an expression of civic concern that made Claire's blood boil. Jack was led in wearing shackles, his weathered face calm despite the circumstances. He nodded to Nathan, a gesture of reassurance that everything would be all right. Nathan did not look reassured. Judge Morrison called the court to order. He was in his 60s, with sharp eyes that suggested intelligence and integrity, but also a weariness that spoke of too many years watching powerful men escape justice. The prosecution went first. Bishop's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Peterson, laid out the case with practiced ease. A barn had burned. 3 witnesses placed Jack McCulloch at the scene. Physical evidence, a kerosene can with Jack's initials scratched into the metal found near the barn. Claire's stomach dropped. The kerosene can was new, not mentioned before. Bishop had been holding back evidence, waiting to spring it at trial. Peterson called his first witness, a ranch hand named Miller, who claimed to have seen Jack near the barn around 10 o'clock on the night of the fire. "Describe what you saw," Peterson prompted. "I was checking fence line, and I seen McCulloch riding toward the Bishop barn. He had something in his saddlebag, looked heavy. When he saw me, he turned his horse and rode off quick-like." "And you're certain it was the defendant?" "Yes, sir. I know Jack McCulloch. Worked with him before he went to work for Holloway." Thornton stood to cross-examine. "Mr. Miller, what was the weather like that night?" "Cold, clear, full moon." Miller hesitated. "I don't rightly recall." "You don't recall?" Thornton's voice sharpened. "You were able to identify a man from a distance in the dark, but you can't remember whether there was a moon?" "It was dark, but I had my lantern." "I see. And where exactly were you when you saw the defendant? Near the fence line on the east pasture. Thornton pulled out a map. Could you show the jury exactly where you were standing? Miller pointed to a spot. Thornton measured quickly. So you were approximately 200 yards from where you claim to have seen Mr. McCulloch. I suppose. And you identified him in the dark at 200 yards while he was moving on horseback. Thornton's skepticism was evident. Mr. Miller, are you familiar with the almanac dates for January? Can't say as I am. January 7th was a new moon, no moonlight at all. Are you telling this jury you identified a man at 200 yards in complete darkness? Miller's confidence wavered. I know what I saw. Or what you were paid to say you saw, Thornton shot back. Peterson objected loudly. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury had seen Miller falter, seen the holes in his story. The second witness was stronger, a woman named Mrs. Crawford, who lived near the Bishop Ranch. She claimed to have seen Jack's distinctive gray horse near the barn around midnight. But Thornton was ready. Mrs. Crawford, how many gray horses would you say are in this county? I couldn't say exactly. Dozens, hundreds. I suppose dozens at least. So seeing a gray horse near the barn doesn't prove it was Mr. McCulloch's horse, does it? It looked like his horse. In the dark from your window you could identify the specific markings on a horse well enough to distinguish it from dozens of others. Thornton shook his head. Mrs. Crawford, have you received any financial consideration from Mr. Bishop recently? The woman's face flushed. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying that 3 days ago you deposited $50 into your account at the Sagebrush Bank, a bank where Mr. Bishop is a major investor. Would you like to explain where that money came from? Peterson objected again, but the jury had heard enough. They were looking at Mrs. Crawford with new skepticism. The third witness never appeared. According to the bailiff, he had left town suddenly that morning. Claire suspected Elizabeth's testimony had frightened him off, worried about perjury charges. Then came the kerosene can. Peterson presented it with dramatic flair, pointing to the initials carved into the metal. J.M. Your Honor, the prosecution rests its case. We have multiple witnesses and physical evidence placing the defendant at the scene of the crime. Thornton stood. The defense would like to examine that evidence, Your Honor. He took the can, studying it carefully. Mr. Peterson, when was this confound? The morning after the fire. And where exactly? Near the remains of the barn. How convenient. Thornton turned the can over. These initials appear to be freshly carved. The metal around them is bright, not weathered like the rest of the can. This can has been outdoors for years, but these initials are perhaps days old. He handed the can to Jack. Mr. McCulloch, is this yours? Jack studied it. No, sir. My tools are all marked with paint, not carved initials, and I don't own a kerosene can this size. So this evidence was planted, Thornton said flatly. Carved recently to match the defendant's initials and placed near the burned barn to frame him. Peterson objected, but his confidence was shaken. The jury was leaning forward now, interested despite themselves. Thornton called Nathan as his first defense witness. Nathan testified calmly and clearly about the card game that had lasted until past midnight, about watching Jack return to the bunkhouse, about the impossibility of Jack having committed the crime. Mr. Holloway, Peterson said on cross-examination, you would lie to protect your foreman, wouldn't you? No, Nathan said firmly. I would tell the truth to protect an innocent man. But you have a vested interest in Mr. McCulloch's freedom. Without him, your ranch operation would suffer. That's true, but I also have a vested interest in justice. If Jack had burned that barn, I'd turn him in myself. I don't protect criminals. The simplicity of the statement carried weight. Nathan was not a man given to flowery speeches, and his plain honesty resonated with the jury. Then came the moment they had been building toward. Thornton called Elizabeth Bishop to the stand. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Grace Bishop stood, her face white with fury, but Marlowe pulled her back down. Elizabeth walked to the stand with her head high, though Claire could see her hands shaking. After swearing in, Elizabeth testified about finding her father's ledger, about the pattern of harassment and property acquisition, about overhearing conversations where Marlowe discussed ways to force Nathan off his land. "Miss Bishop," Thornton said gently, "are you aware that this testimony will likely destroy your relationship with your family?" "Yes." Elizabeth's voice was quiet but firm. "Then why are you doing it?" "Because it's right. Because I'm tired of being part of something evil." Elizabeth looked at her father, and Claire saw tears in her eyes. "I love my father, but I can't help him destroy innocent people." Marlowe's face was purple with rage. He whispered urgently to his lawyers, but there was nothing they could do. The ledger was admitted into evidence. Elizabeth's testimony stood. When Peterson tried to cross-examine, asking about Elizabeth's mental state, suggesting she was unstable or influenced by Claire, Thornton objected successfully. The judge, clearly moved by Elizabeth's courage, protected her from the worst of the assault. The final witness was Claire herself. She testified about the accusations in Philadelphia, about the documentation proving her innocence, about Grace Bishop's campaign to drive her away. "Miss Brennan," Thornton asked, "why did you come to Wyoming? To start over, to find a place where I could work and live without being defined by gossip and lies. And have you found that place?" Claire looked at Nathan, at Tommy sitting in the gallery, at Elizabeth beside her at the table. "Yes, I have." Peterson's cross-examination was brutal. He brought up every detail of Thomas's death, every accusation, every piece of gossip. But Claire had lived through this before. She answered each question calmly, never losing her composure, always returning to the documented facts. When both sides had rested, Judge Morrison called for closing arguments. Peterson gave a passionate speech about law and order, about the need to punish arson regardless of who committed it. Thornton's closing was simpler. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about arson. It's about a powerful man trying to destroy anyone who won't sell him their land. The prosecution's witnesses have been caught in lies. Their evidence has been shown to be planted, and we have provided clear proof that Jack McCulloch was elsewhere when this crime occurred." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Mr. Bishop wants you to believe that Jack McCulloch is guilty, but what he really wants is Nathan Holloway's land, and he's willing to send an innocent man to prison to get it. Don't let him." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. In that time, Claire paced the courthouse halls, unable to sit still. Nathan stood at the window, staring out at nothing. Elizabeth sat alone, having been disowned by her parents in a loud confrontation outside the courthouse. When the jury returned, the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Jack McCulloch, not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Nathan sagged against the wall in relief. Jack smiled for the first time in days. Claire felt tears streaming down her face. But the drama was not over. Judge Morrison called for order, then turned to Marlowe Bishop. "Mr. Bishop, based on testimony and evidence presented in this trial, I am ordering a formal investigation into your business practices. The ledger submitted as evidence suggests a pattern of criminal harassment and fraud. You will remain in this jurisdiction pending investigation." Marlowe stood, his face contorted with fury. "This is an outrage. That ledger was stolen from my private property. By your own daughter, who feared you were committing crimes." The judge's voice was cold. "Your family relationships are not my concern. Your potential criminal activity is." He turned to Deputy Wade. "Take Mr. Bishop into custody pending the investigation." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Grace Bishop was screaming. Marlowe was shouting threats. His lawyers were objecting loudly. But Deputy Wade, looking oddly satisfied, placed Marlowe in handcuffs and led him away. Outside the courthouse in the cold January afternoon, Nathan pulled Claire into his arms and held her tight. Tommy ran up and wrapped his arms around both of them. Jack stood nearby, grinning despite himself. Elizabeth watched from a distance, looking lost but free. "It's over," Claire whispered. "Not quite," Nathan said. "But we won. We actually won." That night, they all gathered at the ranch, Jack in his bunkhouse, finally sleeping in peace. Elizabeth in Tommy's loft, the boy having insisted on giving up his bed. Claire and Nathan sitting by the fire hands, intertwined, too exhausted for words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The investigation would take time. Bishop had allies who might still cause trouble. The social ostracism might continue. But tonight, they had justice. They had each other. And they had hope. Nathan turned to Claire, his gray eyes reflecting firelight. "Marry me. Not because you have to. Not because it's practical. But because you want to." Claire looked at this man who had stood by her when he had every reason to turn away, who had fought for her, believed in her, made her feel valued in a way she had never experienced. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their kiss was tender and certain, a promise made and accepted. Outside, winter still pressed down on the land, but inside by the fire, two people who had been broken were beginning to heal. Together. The wedding took place on New Year's Day, 1887, in the small parlor of Dr. Garrett's house. The guest list was short. Dr. Garrett himself, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, Jack McCulloch, and Tommy, who stood as ring-bearer with fierce pride. Claire wore a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen, altered to fit. Nathan wore his one good suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost new. There were no flowers, no music, no elaborate ceremony, just two people making vows they meant to keep. "I, Nathan Holloway, take you, Claire Brennan, to be my wife. I promise to stand with you in all things, to value your strength, to honor your courage, to build a life worthy of the faith you've shown in me." His voice was steady, but his hands shook as he slipped the simple gold band onto Claire's finger. "I, Claire Brennan, take you, Nathan Holloway, to be my husband. I promise to be your partner in truth, to face every storm with you, to choose you every day for all my days." When Dr. Garrett pronounced them married, Nathan's kiss was gentle but full of promise. Tommy cheered. Jack wiped his eyes with his rough hand, not caring who saw. The small gathering celebrated with a meal Mrs. Chen had prepared, simple but abundant. Elizabeth, who had been staying in town while working at the general store, came by to offer her congratulations. Her parents had disowned her completely, but she held her head high. "I'm glad you're happy," she told Claire quietly. "You deserve it." "So do you," Claire said, "and you'll find it. Freedom is worth the cost." As evening fell, the guests departed, leaving Nathan and Claire alone in their cabin for the first time as husband and wife. Tommy had gone to spend the night with Jack, giving them privacy neither had asked for, but both appreciated. They stood together by the fire, suddenly awkward, despite everything they had been through. This was different now. This was real, permanent, chosen. Nathan took Claire's hands. "I know this isn't the grand romance you might have dreamed of as a girl." "I never dreamed of grand romance," Claire admitted. "I dreamed of safety, of belonging, of being seen." She looked up at him. "You've given me all of that." "Have I?" Nathan's thumb traced circles on her palm. "Because I feel like I've given you nothing but trouble. Scandal, danger, social isolation. You've given me a home, not just a house but a home, a place where I matter, where I'm valued for what I contribute, not judged for my past." Claire moved closer. "That's worth more than any grand romance." Nathan's arms came around her, and they stood there for a long moment, simply holding each other. The fire crackled. Outside wind moved through the pines. Everything else fell away until there was just this two people choosing each other, building something real from the ruins of their pasts. What happened next was tender and private. Two people learning each other with care and patience. There was awkwardness and laughter, nerves and reassurance. But underneath it all was something solid and true, a connection built on respect and earned through trial. The winter passed more easily after that. Marlowe Bishop's investigation dragged on, but he was effectively neutered, his influence broken by public scandal. Some townspeople remained hostile, but others, seeing injustice exposed, began to reconsider their judgments. Mr. Chen extended Nathan credit again. The livery stable resumed normal business. Even the church, under pressure from Dr. Garrett and other progressive members, quietly indicated that the Holloways would be welcome at services. Claire did not need their approval anymore, but she appreciated the gesture. She had learned that belonging was not given by others, but claimed for oneself. Tommy thrived under Claire's teaching, his reading improving daily. He still called her Miss Claire most of the time, but occasionally shyly he would say Ma and watch her face light up. Elizabeth found work at the general store and eventually moved into a small room above it. She began to bloom in her independence, her natural intelligence and kindness emerging now that she was free from her parents' manipulation. And Nathan slowly began to smile more easily. The hard lines around his eyes softened. He laughed at Tommy's jokes. He pulled Claire into his arms for no reason at all, just to hold her. One evening in early March, as the first signs of spring began to show, Nathan found Claire in the barn, checking on a cow heavy with calf. "She'll drop soon," Claire said, running her hand over the cow's swollen belly. "Maybe tonight." "You've gotten good at this," Nathan observed. "Reading the animals, I mean." "I had a good teacher." Claire smiled at him. "And I was motivated. This is my home now. These are my animals, too." Nathan moved closer, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Our home, our animals, our life." "Yes." Claire leaned back against him. "Nathan, I need to tell you something." She felt him tense slightly. "What is it?" "I think I'm with child." For a moment Nathan was utterly still. Then he turned her around, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but I'm late and I've been feeling—" She gestured vaguely. "Different." Nathan's face cycled through shock, fear, and finally joy. "A baby. Our baby." "Are you happy?" Claire asked, seeing the fear lingering beneath the joy. "Terrified," Nathan admitted. "After Rebecca, after losing the baby, I swore I'd never risk that again. But Claire, I'm also happier than I have any right to be." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach, wonder in his eyes. "When? Early autumn, I think. Late September, perhaps early October." Nathan pulled her close, holding her with desperate tenderness. "I won't lose you. I can't lose you." "You won't," Claire promised, though she knew it was a promise she had no power to keep. Childbirth was dangerous, death a constant possibility, but she refused to let fear poison their joy. "We're stronger than Rebecca was, and we have Dr. Garrett close by. We'll be careful." They stood there in the barn, holding each other as the pregnant cow shifted nearby, all of them preparing to bring new life into the world. The months that followed were a kind of domestic heaven Claire had never expected to experience. Her belly swelled with the baby. Nathan hovered protectively, driving her to distraction with his constant worry. Tommy talked to her stomach, telling the baby stories and promises about teaching it to ride and rope. Dr. Garrett checked on her regularly, pronouncing her healthy and strong. "You're built for this," he assured her. "Strong constitution, good health. I have no concerns." But Nathan had concerns. Every twinge made him nervous. Every complaint brought him running. Claire loved him for it, even as it exasperated her. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one evening in July when he insisted she sit down instead of helping with dinner preparation. "I know, but I can't help it. I keep thinking—" He did not finish, but Claire understood. She took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was kicking actively. "Feel that? That's a strong baby. A fighter. Just like us." Nathan's eyes filled with tears he did not try to hide. "I love you, Claire. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. More than I knew I could love anything. I love you too." The words came easily now, though they had been hard at first. Claire had learned that love was not the grand passion of novels, but this showing up every day, choosing the same person, building a life brick by brick. On September 28th, as the sun rose over the valley, Claire's water broke. Nathan sent Tommy to fetch Dr. Garrett and Mrs. Chin, who had agreed to serve as midwife. The labor was long but not dangerous. 16 hours of pain and effort, of Nathan holding her hand and whispering encouragement, of Mrs. Chin's calm, competent presence. And then, as the sun set in shades of gold and pink, Claire pushed one final time and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry. "It's a boy," Dr. Garrett announced, placing the squalling infant on Claire's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Claire looked down at her son, tiny and red-faced and perfect, and felt something in her chest crack open. This was what love felt like. This overwhelming, terrifying, all-consuming need to protect this small life. Nathan knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears, staring at the baby with wonder. "He's perfect." "What should we name him?" Claire asked. Nathan thought for a moment, then smiled. "Daniel, after the son I lost, and Thomas after your husband, the man who wasn't right for you, but who brought you to Philadelphia, which eventually brought you to me." "Daniel Thomas Holloway," Claire said, testing the name. "I like it." Tommy was allowed in to meet his new brother. The 8-year-old approached cautiously, eyes wide. "Can I hold him?" he whispered. Claire helped settle the baby in Tommy's arms, watching the boy's face transform with protective love. "I'm going to teach him everything," Tommy declared. "How to ride and rope and read." "He'd like that," Nathan set his arm around Claire's shoulders. They sat like that for a while, a family complete and whole. Outside, summer faded toward autumn. The cattle grazed peacefully in pastures Nathan now owned free and clear. Marlowe Bishop having been convicted of fraud and forced to sell his own holdings to cover legal fees. Elizabeth stopped by the next day bringing a blanket she had sewn herself. She held the baby awkwardly but with real affection. "He's beautiful," she said. "You're so lucky." "You'll have your own someday," Claire assured her. Elizabeth smiled sadly. "Maybe. But even if I don't, I have this. Family, even if it's not the one I was born into." "Sometimes the family we choose is better than the one we're given," Nathan said. A month later, Elizabeth would meet a quiet teacher who had just arrived in Sagebrush. Within a year she would have her own wedding, her own home, and a freedom she had fought hard to claim. But that was a story for another day. As weeks passed and summer turned to fall, Claire recovered her strength. She watched Nathan with their son, saw the way he held the baby like something precious and fragile, saw the fear and love warring in his eyes. One night she found him standing over Daniel's cradle, just watching the baby sleep. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I'm terrified I'll fail him, that I won't be a good enough father, that I'll make mistakes that hurt him." "You will make mistakes," Claire said honestly. "We both will. But that's being human. What matters is that we love him, protect him, teach him to be good." Nathan pulled her close. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just tired of being afraid." Claire looked up at him. "I spent 2 years running from my past, convinced I didn't deserve happiness. You taught me that happiness isn't something we deserve or don't deserve. It's something we build every day through the choices we make. And what choice are you making? To be happy, to claim this life, to stop apologizing for existing." Claire smiled. "To love you and our sons with everything I have." "Our sons," Nathan repeated. "I like the sound of that." They stood together in the quiet cabin, watching their children sleep, listening to the wind in the pines. Outside, winter was coming again. But they were ready for it. They had survived worse. Together they had faced scandal and sabotage, accusation and trial. They had built something real from nothing, something that would last. The frontier was still hard. Winters were still brutal. Neighbors could still be cruel. But none of that mattered as much anymore, because they had each other. They had their boys. They had their land and their home and their future. And that, Claire thought as Nathan's arms tightened around her, was more than enough. It was everything. Spring came early the following year, melting snow revealing green grass beneath. On a warm April morning, Nathan took Claire to the ridge overlooking their valley. They had not been there since that first winter, and the view had transformed with the seasons. Below them lay the ranch, prosperous and thriving. The barn had been rebuilt larger and stronger. New fences marked clear boundaries. The garden Claire had planted was already showing green. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney where Mrs. Chen was watching the children. "Remember when you first arrived?" Nathan asked. "What you thought when you saw this place?" "I thought it was smaller than I expected, rougher, more isolated." Claire leaned into him. "I thought I might have made a terrible mistake. And now," Claire looked at the valley, at the life they had built together. "Now I think it's exactly the right size, exactly right, period." Nathan turned her to face him. "I have something for you." He pulled a paper from his pocket. Claire unfolded it and gasped. It was the ranch deed newly filed with both their names listed as equal owners. "You already put my name on it before I arrived," she said, confused. "That was a gesture. This is legal reality. Equal ownership, equal say, equal partnership in every way." Nathan's eyes were serious. "I want you to know that this is yours. Not because you married me, but because you earned it. You fought for it. You bled for it." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay. Say you'll keep choosing this life, choosing me, choosing us." "Every day," Claire promised. "For the rest of my life." Their kiss was sweet and certain, a promise renewed and strengthened. When they broke apart, Nathan pulled her close, both of them looking down at their valley. "We should head back," Claire said eventually, "before Tommy tries to feed Daniel something inappropriate." Nathan laughed, the sound free and genuine. "Last week it was bacon. The baby is 7 months old. He means well." They walked down the ridge together, hand in hand, toward the life they had built. Behind them the mountains stood eternal. Ahead their future waited. It would not be easy. The frontier never was. There would be hard winters and difficult seasons, challenges they could not yet imagine. But they would face them together. That was what marriage meant, what partnership meant, what love, real love, actually looked like. Not grand gestures or passionate declarations, but showing up, choosing each other, building something that lasted. Claire looked back once at the ridge where they had stood, remembering the woman who had arrived here 6 months ago, broken and running, convinced she did not deserve happiness. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had learned that happiness was not a gift from fate, but a choice made daily, someone who had learned to fight for what mattered. She turned back to the path, to Nathan walking beside her, to the cabin visible in the distance where their children waited. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had chosen, and she would choose it again, every single day. The end.